territory. Once away from the railheads, Russian logistics depended solely on trucks. As we mentioned before, Russia has approximately half the number of trucks per unit that a comparable American unit would have. The further toward Kyiv that Russian forces moved, the longer the round trip between supply depots and deployed forces grew, inevitably slowing down the advance to a crawl and then finally bringing it to a standstill. The Ukrainians quickly identified this glaring vulnerability in Russian doctrine and made them suffer dearly for it. Ukrainian air and ground forces no longer attacked tanks or infantry fighting vehicles, instead ignored them and focused on destroying Russian trucks. This put even more pressure on an already weak logistics network which would inevitably collapse. As a general withdrawal was announced, many Russian vehicles were simply abandoned, perfectly operational, but without any gas. Russian troops also suffered from a lack of supplies, with many resorting to shooting dogs or cats or simply looting as they had no food. The retreat from Kyiv was Ukraine's first major victory, though truthfully it was more of a self-inflicted defeat than a Ukrainian win. However, the war in the east raged on, and here Russia was making slow but incremental gains. Yet, here too, Russian doctrine ensured that its military was not successful, as it should be against an inferior force. By the time of the Russian invasion, Ukraine's military had been completely transformed. In 2014, Ukraine fielded an unwieldy military still stuck in its Soviet roots. However, after the Russian annexation of Crimea, the United States sent hundreds of personnel to train Ukrainian forces.
I'm Javi, and I got Botox Cosmetic. There was a particular photograph. The lines were so prominent, it's all I saw. It made me feel like, okay, it was time to get Botox Cosmetic. I'm still Javi, but I just have fewer lines.
Talk to your doctor about Botox Cosmetic and whether it's right for you. The effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
You see these cars? There were people in them when they were hit. That's why we make reckless drivers, and the insurance companies that defend them pay. Don't let the insurance company treat you like junk. Get the Bernstein Advantage. 1-800-CALL-SAM.
Hundreds of personnel to train Ukrainian forces to fight and operate like a Western military. The result would be a Ukrainian military so transformed that it caught Russia completely by surprise. By comparison, Russia's military is very top-down oriented. Orders come from above, and junior personnel have little to no room for interpretation, even in the midst of an evolving combat environment. Russia's lack of a strong non-commissioned officer corps also means that Russian units lack discipline and the professional control
chili grenades and stubborn landmines,
making them large but very unwieldy. The two factors combined make for a military that's akin to a very clumsy juggernaut. By comparison, Ukraine's forces encourage decision-making by junior officers and enjoy a disciplined NCO corps. While not as well developed as a Western military, the difference is staggering, with Ukrainian units showing an incredible degree of initiative and flexibility compared to Russian forces. The rigid inflexibility of Russian doctrine led directly to many defeats in its campaign for Ukraine, but none quite as high profile as the utter disaster Russian forces experienced attempting a river crossing at Bilohorivka. When the first crossing was shelled by Ukrainian forces, the Russians simply attempted it again, at the exact same place. Predictably, they were once more decimated by Ukrainian artillery. That didn't stop them from attempting to cross the river at the exact same place multiple more times, all meeting with the exact same disaster. The crossings were an exercise in madness, yielding the exact same result each time. But Russian troops had no choice but to proceed with the same plan drawn up by some senior military leader far from the front. It's estimated that Russia lost as much as an entire battalion tactical group's worth of equipment during the attempts. But this river crossing disaster has played out across eastern Ukraine over and over again, with Russian forces showing a crippling deficiency in both command and doctrine. Despite this and similar disasters, the sheer weight of Russian forces continued to push the Ukrainian defenders westward, with small incremental gains, until the stunning Ukrainian counteroffensive on September 6th. Planned in cooperation with the U.S. senior military leaders, Ukraine has now recaptured enough territory to send Russian forces in the north into a general retreat. It's the first major counteroffensive of the Ukraine war. And through a combination of brilliant deception, real-time intelligence courtesy of the U.S., and sheer guts and determination, Ukrainian forces have delivered a stunning defeat to Russia that nobody saw coming on February 24th. But the question remains, is Ukraine winning the war? Tracking Russian and Ukrainian losses is difficult because both sides have a vested interest in keeping those figures secret. However, open source reporting has led to some estimates that are likely within the ballpark of the true figure. Russia is estimated to have lost right around 2,000 tanks, with many of them captured and put into use by Ukrainian forces. Estimates of captured tanks after the latest offensive alone is somewhere around 24, enough for Ukraine to equip 2 tank companies. If true, this would be about 66% of Russia's modern tank forces, not counting the 20,000 hunks of junk that Russia keeps in storage as leftovers from the Cold War. Although we have confirmation of T-62s being sent into combat in Ukraine, hinting that Russia's tank problems are reaching critical levels. It's estimated that Russia has also lost around 4,500 infantry fighting vehicles, or around 34% of its total force. 1,300 artillery of self-propelled and traditional type have also been captured, abandoned, or destroyed, or around 23% of Russia's total. 250 of Russia's most modern aircraft have also been downed, though this is only around 18% of Russia's total. Most important of all, though, after-tank losses are Russia's estimated 217,000 casualties, 54,000 of which are estimated as KIA. This is a quarter of the entire Russian armed forces. But that figure is deceiving because it's counting all military personnel. With an estimated 300,000 ground combat forces, this means that a significant number of its combat personnel are either dead or wounded. Losses aren't Russia's only problem. It's widely reported that Russian morale is at all-time lows. Almost from the start of combat operations, Russian troops were exhibiting low morale, with one tank unit going so far as to run their commander's legs over as retaliation for the high casualties they took. Now, Russian morale appears to be reaching critical lows, especially in the north, where the total number of POWs taken is unknown, but some estimate around 3,000. Perhaps the greatest sign of Russia's weakness, however, is the fact that according to reports, Russia has ceased sending new units into Ukraine. After the defeat in the Kharkiv Oblast, Russia has begun a major nationwide recruitment effort to replenish its combat losses. While not yet announcing mobilization, a national recruitment campaign is a sign that Russia recognizes it cannot generate the manpower needed to secure its objectives in Ukraine. On the home front, though, the Russian economy is starting to show signs of serious weakening due to sanctions. Western sanctions have been criticized even amongst the West as ineffective. Yet this was only because Russia has used significant currency reserves to artificially prop up its economy. Those reserves are slowly running out, and the reduction in energy that...
How mad is Vladimir Putin?
The stakes in Ukraine could not be higher, with the Russian military making direct attacks on civilian targets like apartment buildings. And given Vladimir Putin's apparent willingness to escalate, Russian experts are now speculating about his mental state.
Has Putin gone crazy? Is he losing his grip on his sanity?
Evaluating Vladimir Putin's state of mind a top priority now.
The Russian leader could be completely off his rocker.
Some people say he has cancer, and some people say he has brain fog from COVID.
Even in Russia, citizens are buzzing. The Russian people may be starting to think Putin is insane, goes this headline.
I tell you, I think this guy's nutter.
You think he's just kind of losing it?
Yes, I do.
Putin's mental state is getting late-night laughs.
A growing number of U.S. officials and their allies are questioning Putin's mental state. Today, to show he's still sharp, Putin was like, person, woman, man, Smirnov, borscht. The war in Ukraine isn't working out the way Russia intended. Take that, Putin.
And on top of everything, he was just stripped of his Taekwondo black belt by the World Federation, which condemned Putin's brutal attacks on innocent lives. There are reports that Putin has moved his family to a secret nuke-proof bunker in faraway Siberia. The Russian leader also owns Putin's palace, said to be one of the most expensive private homes in the world. An expose on Putin's palace is said to have infuriated the Russian dictator.
The president of Russia built a real theatre at home, with a huge stage backstage, dressing rooms and luxury boxes. I'm not kidding. Inside Putin's palace, there is a full-fledged theatre.
With his invasion of Ukraine throwing the world and his own nation in crisis, no one can predict what Putin will do next.
I I don't know if it's a mental state, but I haven't seen a lot of people that can understand strategically what Russia has to benefit by doing this.
Еще раз подчеркну, что Украина для нас это не просто соседняя страна. Это неотъемлемая часть нашей собственной истории, культуры, духовного пространства. Это наши товарищи, близкие, среди которых не только коллеги, друзья, бывшие сослуживцы.
Why are you doing this? Why are you fighting this needless war? This war of conquest that will topple so many lives. He sent his forces, his missiles, in the middle of the night. These are the troops, hundreds of thousands of them, that had been camped out on the border for months. Troops that Putin had insisted were there for a routine military exercise, and that the US and UK intel swore were actually preparing to invade. Many around the world, including in Ukraine, thought that this was just the West being dramatic, stoking the tensions.